On a windy, unsettled night on October 6, 1974, two Queensland police officers arrived at the deserted Carnival Youth Camp. The caretaker hurried to greet them, his face pale with worry. For more than half an hour, the quiet, wooded hillsides of the Toowoomba Ranges had echoed with a scream of terror. The officers stopped and listened. Suddenly, the sound came, piercing screams that cut through the night, the voices of at least two women. But the source of the sounds was elusive, carried by the wind. Each time they seemed to locate it, the screams changed, as if the hills themselves were screaming. 40 minutes later, silence fell, and after a grueling search of the range, the officers left without answers, haunted by what they had heard. Lorraine Woods and Wendy Ellison were two young, energetic nursing students, inseparable friends bound together by a common drive to care for others. Both came from close-knit families, Lorraine from a small farm in Dubbo and Wendy from Sydney. In late 1974, they decided to reward themselves for completing their rigorous first year of training. They set off across the country, determined to explore Australia's wild beauty. They visited iconic destinations such as Mount Isa and Alice Springs, before stopping for a few days at Lorraine's family farm in Dubbo. Their final leg was supposed to be simple, an 800 kilometers drive to Brisbane in Lorraine's trusty Volkswagen Beetle. But fate had other plans. Halfway through the journey, the Beetle broke down, estimated to take a week to repair. With a tight budget, the two girls decided to hitchhike. They reluctantly accepted a ride from a stranger to Wendy's sister's house in Brisbane, where they spent 6 days exploring the city. By October 6, they were ready to go home. Although Wendy's sister Susan offered to pay for the bus fare, Lorraine was confident that everything would be fine, just as it had been on the way there. Susan urged caution, but the two girls laughed. As Wendy left, she joked, "I've got Lorraine to protect me." They promised to stay in touch, but disappeared without a trace after they left. 2 days later, when the girls still hadn't returned home, Lorraine's mother felt the first pangs of fear. The alarm was raised. An investigation was launched, and with no leads to work with, Queensland police found themselves chasing a trail that had gone cold before it had even begun. For nearly 2 years, Lorraine and Wendy's family lived in anguish. Hope turned to horror on June 25, 1975, when a retired couple driving on a Sunday found themselves pulled off a narrow road near Murphy's Creek. Parking their car by an abandoned barbed wire fence, they walked through dense trees until they came to a clearing littered with what looked like abandoned belongings, a camera, a wallet, and a small pile of clothing. As they surveyed the scene, one of them noticed an object nearby, on the ground. It was a human skull. By the next day, the crime scene was cordoned off, with detectives on hand. They confirmed that the skull and scattered bones were those of Lorraine Woods and Wendy Ellison. Wildlife had scattered their remains, but it was clear that the bodies had originally been laid out side by side, uncovered, as if the killer had assumed they would never be found. Forensic analysis showed that both women had been beaten with a blunt object, possibly a thick log found nearby. Lorraine may have died instantly from a single blow, while Wendy suffered multiple injuries, her face crushed. A thin piece of synthetic rope was found, suggesting they had been tied up, their struggle for survival reduced to this grim picture. Then the detectives found something strange, a men's silver ring with a large blue stone embedded in it, lying in the dirt. It was an object that neither woman had, and while some detectives thought it had been left there by mistake, others felt it was a deliberate message, a clue the killer wanted them to find. But then came the breakthrough. As soon as police officer Eric Jensen saw the news of the remains, he recalled the screams that had haunted him since that fateful night in 1974. He realized that it was October 6, the night Lorraine and Wendy were last seen alive. Police reasoned that it was likely their murders had occurred that very night, right in those hills. Over time, detectives noticed a pattern. The bodies of 6 other young women had been discovered in the past 2 years, murdered in similarly brutal ways after hitchhiking along the Gold Coast. This clear pattern suggested the possibility of a serial killer who had eluded police for years. By the 1980s, the unsolved case had become a cold but notorious file in the archives. But in 1988, a New South Wales convict made a shocking claim: he had witnessed two men confessing to the murders of Lorraine and Wendy. The suspects were identified as Donald Avery and Kyle Hilton, both from Toowoomba, both known for their violent behavior. Although the lead did not lead to an arrest, it opened a Pandora's box. Soon, police discovered the deeply disturbing reputation of the Avery and Hilton families, whose young members were known to abduct teenage girls, take them to remote areas, and violently assault them. Surprisingly, a light green Holden car with missing door handles and locks, a vehicle the gang used to prevent their victims from escaping, had been reported near Murphy's Creek in 1974, precisely where the bodies were found. Despite the convictions, the case remained deadlocked. Frustrated, Lorraine's brother, Ethan Woods, published a book in 2003, sparking public interest and prompting the sheriff to reopen the case. This led Detective Kerry Johnson to take over the case. Johnson spent months combing through witness accounts, eventually piecing together the chilling story of what might have happened that night. One witness, an elderly woman named Norma, came forward, claiming to have encountered a young woman with light brown hair who had knocked on her door, pleading for help on a stormy night in 1974. The young woman said that her friend was in a car with dangerous men and that she feared for her life. Although Norma was hesitant to let her in, she eventually agreed, but the girl panicked and left, saying, "They'll kill my friend if I don't come back." Norma watched helplessly as the young woman walked away, disappearing into the night. When Norma later saw a photo of Lorraine in the newspaper, she realized she had been talking to her. This testimony provided another piece of the puzzle. Then, in 2013, in a long-awaited investigation, the public finally heard the names of the gang members involved. 7 suspects were named: Wayne Boogie Hilton, Donald Avery, Alan Shorty Avery, Larry Charles, Desmond Hilton, Jimmy Grayson, and an unidentified woman who was said to have been an unwilling witness to the murders. Some testified, denying any knowledge, while others were visibly shaken as they tried to avoid responsibility. But the most chilling testimony came from a woman named Kim Stanley, who testified that she had met a stranger named Ellen in a bar one night in the 1980s. Ellen, drunk and unsteady, allegedly confessed to being present at the murders of Lorraine and Wendy, describing in detail how the girls had been tied up, beaten, and dumped in the woods. Although Kim struggled to recall Ellen's face, the details she provided were startlingly accurate. However, when asked if she remembered the names Ellen had mentioned, Kim fell silent, eventually mumbling, "I don't remember." On June 14, 2013, the police investigator released his findings. Based on the testimony, including Kim's account of Ellen's confession, he concluded that Lorraine and Wendy had indeed been murdered by multiple attackers, possibly at Murphy's Creek. He believed that the young nurses had unwittingly encountered some of Queensland's most dangerous men. However, due to insufficient evidence, he ruled that only one of the suspects, Wayne Hilton, could be directly implicated in the murders. However, Wayne Hilton died in a car accident in 1986. As for the others, they were released without charge due to lack of concrete evidence. Still, the police investigator's final words were haunting. As he addressed the suspects directly, "The truth is out now. You have to live with it, knowing that everyone now knows who you are and what you did." Outside the court, Lorraine's brother Ethan spoke to reporters. "They may be free, but they will never have peace," he said, his voice even but strained. While the investigation did not bring justice, it did bring closure to the families, finally exposing the faces of those who were believed to have caused such horror. A memorial plaque now stands at St. George's Hospital in Sydney in memory of Lorraine and Wendy. Ethan once said, "It's a bitter irony. Lorraine devoted her life to helping people, and in the end, she was murdered." In a case marked by haunting screams and a dark path of secrets, the memory of Lorraine Woods and Wendy Ellison remains a warning and a reminder, a call to action for justice that still echoes through the silence of the Toowoomba Ranges.